discussion exploring the psychedelic debate, exploring the controversy surrounding mind alternative substances. Very important topic, but to this discussion, I really need my expert here joining me to the stage, so please give them a warm welcome, Katrina, Ffrench founder and managing director, and UNJUST. Hello. Alexander Kuznetsov, managing partner at Kodori Ventures. Gregory Roufa, co-founder and CEO at aNUma. Nicholas Kadysh, founder and CEO at PharmAla Biotech. And our moderator, Lawrence Purkiss, lead analyst and Prohibition partners. Hello. Welcome to the stage. Interesting topic ahead of us. So we have 35 minutes, including the Q&A session. So maybe let's leave 5 last minutes for that. Thank you and enjoy the discussion.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I hope you've enjoyed the conference. So, yeah, my name is Lawrence Purkiss. I am lead analyst at Prohibition Partners. We are a market intelligence firm that focuses on the legal cannabis industry. So I'll have introductions from our panelists in just a second, but first I think I'd like to just set a bit of context. So, when we're talking about mind-altering substances, we're talking quite broadly, right? Because there are mind-altering substances which exist in our everyday lives, from caffeine and alcohol to Ritalin, Adderall, anti-anxiety medication, antidepressants. There's no shortage. And when we talk about controversy in mind-altering substances, you know, we're talking about Schedule I controlled substances now. It's substances which are in the highest levels of legal control. And this is where cannabis, MDMA, psilocybin sit. So according to our legal definitions, these substances have little to no therapeutic value and pose a high risk to public health. So we've essentially classified them as dangerous and useless. And where the controversy comes in is that there's an increasing recognition now that, in fact, the therapeutic potential and the risk to public health are different. The therapeutic potential is high and the risk to public health is lower than befits the legal classification. But once you've labeled something as dangerous, it's hard to bring that back into the mainstream, right? And it's difficult, not just because you're fighting against public opinion, the opinion of regulators, the opinion of healthcare professionals, but once you put something in Schedule I, there are all sorts of regulatory barriers that prevent research, that prevent development. It makes it hard to prove safety, and it makes it hard to prove clinical efficacy if you really can't do much with the substances. So that's one side of the controversy. That's one side of what we're going to explore. There's another topic that we're going to touch on that relates to this, and that's this. Drug abuse is problematic in society, of course. We all know that. There's no denying that. But there's an increasing realization recently that the ways in which we enforce the controls of these substances is in itself problematic. So the ways in which we enforce drug laws is problematic. The criminalization and prohibition policies, in the ways that they're enforced, often intensify and magnify the problems that they're intended to address. And the ways that this affects society is unequal. The ways we enforce our drug laws is unequal. And so it affects some communities more than others. And time and again, across different countries, statistics have shown that racialized communities are disproportionately criminalized under our drug laws, right? So you have people in racialized communities are more likely to be stopped and searched on the street for drugs if they're found to be in possession, they're more likely to face criminal charges, and they face longer sentences for the same offenses compared to other groups. So that's what we're going to touch on today. These are the two sides. So let's get down to the panel. I'll start with some introductions from the panelists. We start with you, Nick, and we'll go across.
Sure, of course. Hi. I'm Nick Kadysh. I'm the founder and CEO of PharmAla Biotech. PharmAla is an MDMA company. We're the only publicly traded company that currently makes pharmaceutical-grade MDMA. We support clinical trials all over the world, and we are currently in commercial stage in Canada through the Special Access Program, and in Australia, where we have a joint venture with Vitura Health to deliver PTSD treatments to patients with our MDMA.
Thank you. Katrina Ffrench, founding director of UNJUST CIC, otherwise known as UNJUST UK, and we challenge racial discrimination in policing and the criminal legal system, and over the last couple of years have focused on cannabis specifically and how it's policed, and have been advocating for decriminalization, regulation, and for those that have been impacted by the racist war on drugs, for them to be empowered as society changes and not be left behind. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Kuznetsov here, managing partner at Kodori Ventures. We invest into early stage mental health companies focused on innovation. A large part of that is the emergent psychedelic market and the biotech sphere surrounding that.
Hi everyone, thanks for letting me be here. I'm Gregory Roufa, CEO of aNUma. aNUma creates a digital program for patients who are facing a life-threatening illness to support their mental health and well-being. It comes off of our technologies, research into our technology's ability to occasion a self-transcendent experience similar to psychedelics, but on the same order of magnitude, but without any substances whatsoever, just with the external stimuli.
Okay, thanks guys. So I'd like to start with where we actually are with some of these topics right now. So what the current status is. Nick, I'll start with you. If you could tell us, where is MDMA treatment happening at the moment? What is it being used to treat? And what does treatment look like?
Yeah, of course. So the first thing I think, it's a good level setting to remind everyone that unlike with cannabis, psychedelics are not one thing. There's a range of different both biological agents that come from nature, synthetic drugs that sort of are, sort of lumped in with the psychedelic class. MDMA is actually not a psychedelic, if we're being completely honest, but it's sort of just been lumped in with the rest of these drugs because a lot of the development is happening at the same time. MDMA has now been through 2 phase 3 clinical trials, which is one more than you usually need. In controlled substances, you have to do a phase 3 2 times. Both of these have been published in Nature, which is quite a good medical journal. And MDMA therapy for PTSD has been designated a breakthrough therapy by the FDA. By any measure, an incredibly successful clinical drug development program, and yet still not legal. I think most of the people in the industry anticipate that MDMA will be the first of this sort of wave of novel psychedelic mental health drugs to be approved. We anticipate it'll be approved by FDA next year, maybe closer to the end of the year, depending on when it is submitted. But there are sort of countries that are moving even faster. So in Canada and in Australia, those are the 2 countries where sort of the most progress has been made. And in both of those countries, there are treatments going on right now that we support.
Nice, thanks. So Gregory, I'd like to come to you next with the same question, but with the therapeutic application of psychedelics. So where are we seeing it? What are the most effective use cases? And yeah, what does treatment look like?
Sure, thank you. So aNUma, the company, the digital technology company, is my public-facing piece. And my private side, I have several decades of experience with psychedelics, seeing hundreds of people through their journeys, their psychedelic journeys. And aNUma is actually a combination of this public side, which is software development, with this private side of mine. What we're working on at aNUma is fear of death, end-of-life distress, and that's a great use of our technology and psychedelics. We believe our technology can be used wherever psychedelics could be used, and there's a range of places. There's hundreds of trials out there currently with psychedelics, trying trauma, depression, anxiety disorders, anorexia, you name it, it's being tried. There's hundreds, and that's, I think, one of the things that's happened is just this explosion in research.
Nice, thanks. And Alexander, does any of this resonate with you? What are you seeing in the projects that you're involved in? What's the current status around psychedelics in treatment of mental health, particularly?
Well, there's really interesting kind of developments on the mental health side, and I think, you know, if we look at the indications, obviously a lot of them are focused primarily on the affective ones. So we're talking depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder. At the same time, there's an entirely new kind of horizon that's being opened up at the moment. We're looking at non-hallucinogenic tryptamines, non-hallucinogenic empathogens. We're looking at much broader applications in the drug development space. So we're looking, you know, and what we're seeing is things that we would never really imagine would be applicable, like anti-inflammation, like, you know, potentially looking at some cancer research. All of this is incredibly nascent. It's very fresh. Obviously, we're going to have to wait longer until the studies are finalized and until we actually see the results of them. But, you know, behind the scenes, I think that a lot of people are excited about not only the immediate applications and the immediate forms, so not just using psilocybin, LSD, MDMA in their current compounds, but what does the next generation of these drugs actually look like? There's been so much stigma ever since, you know, the 70s, 60s, that all research was just shut down. So it's almost like we were running, and then nothing. I mean, it's hard to find an analogy about something being shut down from day one, from one day to another. So really, there's this backlog of incredible research that was being done underground. You see this, you know, in the amazing writings of like Alexander Shulgin and, you know, Dr. Nichols, and there's so much to be explored. And honestly, I think that's what's the most exciting. It's, of course, we have the applications today and tomorrow and in 3 to 5 years. What is that going to look like in 10 years? That's really what's happening and what's bubbling under the surface.
Can I just jump in on that? Yeah. The only other thing I'd add to that is, you know, when you go from a full stop, which is basically where we're at with research, it's not just a question of like the researchers. There's been a lot of researchers who've been super interested in psychedelic effects for a long time, but you know, if you want to run a clinical trial, you need government approval, you need ethics approval, you need some of the molecule to work on, right? Like if you're going to dose patients. So one of the things that we found when we first started is there was no MDMA. Like there was tons of researchers who wanted to do research on MDMA, couldn't get their hands on it. And so all of these sort of practical problems, you know, they begin, and until somebody solves them, the research can't really move forward either. So all of it takes time.
Yeah, so we're fighting against inertia as well. And on the topic of fighting against inertia, Katrina, could you expand on what I touched on earlier with existing systems of enforcement of drug laws and their impacts on racialized communities through the criminal legal system?
Most definitely. I think what I have to add echoes why things haven't maybe moved as quickly as they should have done is because of prohibition. And I really want to echo that prohibition impacts everybody, but it does have a detrimental and a disproportionate impact on racialized communities. And I say racialized as in anybody that's non-white usually, in terms of being othered by a society. So bringing it back to the UK, last year we saw 543,000 stop and searches, which is a stop and frisk. I don't know the language, but basically the police believe you have a prohibited article and they have the right to stop you. Out of those stops, 332,000 were for drugs. So that's like 60% of police time being used on the streets to stop people for illegal substances. Mainly in the main, it's low-level possession of cannabis. And I have to say, if you're a black male in the UK, you're 4 times more likely to be stopped than a white male, despite having reported by the ONS, which is the Office of National Statistics, that black people and racialized communities, and I say black because that's the organization I've set up is specifically to support black people, but we support all people, have said that they report, yes, less usage. So we report less usage, but we have higher rates of stop and search. Make it make sense. And that definitely has a detrimental impact on people and their understanding of what is actually potentially medicine. So why should the police decide whether you're self-medicating or whether you're doing something illegally? But also, in terms of the history of this, is we have communities that migrated to Europe during the 50s and the 40s, and they had connections with these medicines and these plants way before they came. And they come to a new land, they're told that this is illegal, they can't get their hands on it, and then for 70 years, I've been told if you use it, you're a criminal, stigma, 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 and then out of nowhere, just be frank, white men in white suits are saying, yay, we're gonna use this. How do we ensure that the people who have been harmed by prohibition the most are not left behind when things become decriminalized and legalized? How do providers ensure that when you look at your patient list, that it is representative of the people that are in the countries that you serve? So I think we just need to understand a lot of people have drank the Kool-Aid, and that the stigma that comes with the racist war on drugs will definitely have an impact on people thinking that they can use these things for the betterment of their health. And we have to be understanding and alive to the harms that have been caused.
Yeah, so I think, as you can see, on this panel, there's a wide range of expertise. We're actually coming from reasonably different backgrounds, but you can detect a similarity in the themes of what we're talking about, right? And so I'd like to sort of have this as an open question to the panel. On the theme of challenges and barriers, we've just mentioned inertia as something that has to be overcome. What are some of the challenges and barriers that you're facing right now, or that people in the industries that you're in are facing and have to be overcome? Or whether it's organizations like yours, Katrina, or whether it's investment, barriers to investment, Alexander. So what are some other barriers to overcome?
If it's okay, I'll just come in and leave it, is the hypocrisy of the government in the UK. So GW Pharmaceuticals sells cannabis, it exports it, but if you're caught with it, you're going to prison. So we have government hypocrisy, and we have people who are stakeholders of of that business as ministers or ministers' wives and husbands. So we don't have transparency. And what we have are people who could benefit from the medicine not being allowed it, but still seeing the stigma in terms of drug dealers, gangs, a whole narrative that means that if substances do become decriminalized, I believe people's fears of being judged will mean they don't. So we have policymakers who may want to do the right thing, but the government says not. And we also have people in society that, as I said, have drunk the Kool-Aid. So when you're having conversations, they come with, that's illegal, it's criminal, there's no evidence to say it works. And if we look back at history, specifically for cannabis in Jamaica, that's my country of origin after Africa, was these people have been farming ganja, I'm gonna call it ganja, for centuries, and were unable to get licenses in the same way as, venture capitalists coming in. So there's a hypocrisy that goes on, and the barrier is how do we educate people to challenge the government and to challenge their policymakers to ensure that what they do, what is implemented, is equitable. That's the biggest challenge. Thanks.
It's not just the UK. I will say, like in Canada, we have legalized cannabis. Recreational cannabis is legal in Canada. The sky didn't fall. Everything is fine. Nothing has changed. But they still haven't expunged the records of people caught, with small amounts of cannabis before legalization, which strikes me as a sort of a baseline of fairness. If we all agree that this should be legal, then if a week before legalization you got caught with a joint, you should not have a criminal record, right? And so there's always sort of more work to do.
Well, I think that one of the reasons we're all up here is that the tremendous healing potential of these medicines. I've, since my first experience over 35 years ago, I've seen psychedelics as really one of the only ways that we can unfuck ourselves as a species. It's true. I mean, we're on a death trip right now with this planet and its ecosystem. And they're one of the only things I can see that can actually break through and get people to change their behavior at a significant enough level. And so, but they're very powerful, and they need to be held appropriately. And we don't have a culture of how do you train that. And so the biggest obstacle right now is really the training of qualified guides and therapists to help people along. That's probably the biggest, and legality, of course. I mean, legal issue is the number one.
Yeah, I was going to bring up this idea of training therapists. So I completely agree with you. Huge challenge for the industry right now. For most of these protocols, it's a completely different modality of care than what we are used to. Like usually what we're used to with pharma is, here's a pill, take your pill once a day, and that's it, right? That's the treatment. Here, the way this works is, like for MDMA therapy, for example, you're going to do a day with your therapist preparing. Then you're going to do a full day session where you're on the drug going through therapy, right? And then the day after that, you're going to do integration. So you're going to spend an awful lot of time with your therapist. It's going to be expensive. The therapist needs to be trained on how to work with people under the influence of these drugs. Of course, the flip side of that is, with MDMA therapy, after 3 sessions, so 3 months, 70% of patients no longer were diagnosed as having PTSD at all. So it is like a cure for PTSD. It's a sea change in how we look at mental illness, right? Trauma can be treated, can be cured functionally. But that requires an awful lot of like machinery that we don't really have. Like we don't have these clinics, we don't have these therapists, and unless we sort of do the work now to train those people up to prepare, even legalizing the drug is not going to be enough. You still need to build out this whole machinery, and it's very difficult to build it out while the drug is still not approved.
I kind of want to ask the panelists, what role do you think, like the government or like public organizations should have in this pursuit, in terms of in creating new treatment spaces, in terms of developing new therapies, in terms of funding the actual drug development? Do you think that is the place of government, as in because of the incredible healing potential, right? I mean, I personally think that there's a net benefit if there's just a more concentrated effort in terms of promoting not the wanton use of this, but the normalization of this being another medicinal pathway. And I think it's been a huge blind spot. And, I think to the original question, Lawrence, in terms of, the barriers, people look at psychedelics very differently than they do pretty much to every other drug class, right? I mean, you can have, you can get prescribed benzodiazepines, highly addictive. You have chronic pain, have an opioid. These things have incredible, we see the societal effects in the negative. So, and going back to the question, as societies, do you think that we should be supporting, or there is a role for governments and public institutions to be sort of reversing that change? Or should this be on the individual?
I'm coming in right away. The government has made this the problem, so it's incumbent they fix it. We pay taxes. Everyone in here pays taxes, even if it's only a little bit if you're the 1%. But everyone pays taxes, and there's a social obligation for the government to serve its people wherever you are. So yes, I believe that the government should be educating people about the changes that are coming, and we should definitely ensure that any private venture capitalists that are coming in, that's all fine, we need funds, but for me, that the communities that have been harmed for over 70 years are the people that are being trained as well, because we all have our biases, and what we don't want, and I see this with the police with mental health, is someone's having a mental health crisis, a young black man, he's seen as being aggressive and frightening and doesn't get the support or the vulnerability. So if we are going to train people, we have to understand unfortunately, our societies are built on division, unfairness, and we have to make sure when these psychedelics come in, we don't embed those in when they put them out. So I'd say yes to the government. I'd say there needs to be a redistribution of the taxes that come out of this. So if there are companies, that money goes into the areas that were high mental health or high levels of policing, and that the people who have suffered are able to be part of those boards, they're able to be part of the decision making, because if they're not, let's just be frank, we're no different from what we've been doing now. We're just going to embake those harms. So yes, it's up to the government, but there is a role for civil society, and there is a role for capitalism. We are in a capitalist society, but the governments should be leading on this, and there should be space for home grows. You shouldn't have to go to a club to buy anything in terms of cannabis. You should be able to grow it like you do tomatoes in your backyard and have that access. So the governments need to be more liberalized, and they need to take responsibility for the harms that have been caused.
Yeah, I would add to that as well by just saying that governments who are taking the decision to decriminalize drugs and take a new approach to these substances are doing so based on the pragmatic realization that the systems in place currently that we have don't work. And there's a convergence of forces that is leading us towards decriminalization and opening, being able to explore medical access as well, being able to research them. And one of them is the medical argument that we talked about. Another is the fact that drug laws, as they exist, lead to discrimination, which we touched on. Another is the fact that when you have problems of addiction in society, if you treat addicts as health patients instead of criminals, it's way more effective in treating addiction. And another is the simple reality that the black market exists, whether we ignore it or not. And if you're going to have a market, you might as well regulate it. So another theme that I want to pick up on here is, I guess, the opposition to this convergence of forces and the pragmatic decision, or the movement of progress this way, the movement of progress forward. Where does the controversy come from? And in what areas of society does the pushback come from, and what's the narrative?
So one of my roles in the industry is I'm the board chair for PsyCan, which is the trade association for the for-profit medicinal psychedelics industry in Canada. So we meet with government decision makers all the time. And I will say, I don't think that there is that much of a stigma left. I actually think that most of the resistance to change here is simply resistance to change. Like, it is not a question of, do governments see value in novel mental health treatments? They do. But changing the law is hard, and you have to work at it. And if you make a mistake, then politically, you might get into trouble. And so basically the biggest pushback we see is sort of just why should we? Why do we bother? A lot of the time when we lobby on these issues, I find it's like pushing on an open door. People are actually quite welcoming of the idea. The problem comes when you say, well, now you have to actually do stuff.
I'm going to be a bit, well, not controversial, but say for me, if cannabis was legalized in the UK tomorrow, there would be a lot of police officers that would have no right to put their hands on a black body, because cannabis would be legal. So I get really concerned about what would they be doing. Not that I don't think they would be doing anything, but there's this massive change shift about who's gonna be othered if the thing we've been othering is this group of people, this specific substance. There's a mind shift of what we should be catching, and obviously it should be violent offenders. But I think the system or the powers that be are quite happy to have people othered and to have scapegoats. And that's why it's incumbent on us, if you're in healthcare, to see everybody as equal and not to drink the kind of policing Kool-Aid that may have you have certain stereotypes about certain groups. Because essentially that's what Prohibition has done. It's enabled us to group people together and usually stigma them. So I'd say change isn't happening because we often need a bogeyman in society, and drugs enables us to provide a bogeyman in society.
But
woman.
But change is happening, and it's slowly, and it's probably appropriately slow. There's areas that would like to go faster, but the move to decriminalization and towards the therapeutic benefits of this is positive, and we're seeing it in some areas, and it will continue to grow. But in United States, it's in Oregon and Colorado and a few cities in California. And this has been not the work of government, it's been the work of the people getting together and with the police and getting agreements about how we move forward.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all of that. So I'd like to move on to another theme. Now we have 8 minutes left. I think if there's a lot of demand for questions, we can have a Q&A section in the last 5 minutes. And if not, we can carry on with the topics. So given that we're at a digital health conference, I'd like to ask, where are the current sort of intersections of digitalization, digital health, digital tech, with the treatments that we're talking about here?
Sure, I can take that. I'm curious about your response as well. So there's a lot of opportunity. I think when it comes to psychedelics themselves, it's really in the training and the learning of how to get appropriate people holding space for people as and the training of the medical professionals. There's certainly opportunity, and we've explored some of those opportunities to bring in digital technologies, but the medicine's there. It's about how do you use it. And I think an important point to put, and those who have experience with this probably understand it, but psychedelics are just the catalyst. They're not the cure. And they have to be used in a context that is supportive of the repatterning of behavior that happens after that catalyst is opened. And that's the reason why you need therapists trained, because it's not take this pill and all of a sudden your depression's gone. It's take this pill and then unlearn whatever trauma, whatever brought up that depression in the first place. And so you need this education. It's education.
I would say on the sort of the clinical trial side of things, there's been a lot of really interesting developments in terms of recruitment. And Katrina, I think addressing some of the concerns that you have in terms of, yeah, it's incredibly important that these trials don't consist of mainly affluent 20-year-olds from universities, which is where a lot of these clinical study data actually comes from. And historically, that's been a massive oversight. How do we address that? How do we make sure that we're not repeating the same mistakes that we've done so blatantly and so obviously in the past? So, again, recruitment, I think, delivery methods. Yeah. How do you pair maybe some digital therapeutics with psychedelic medicines? Again, these things are incredibly powerful when taken at high clinical doses. You have to be incredibly careful to not, first do no harm, right? And that's really where I would also be careful about tempering the pace at which we want to move fast and break things, because we have the potential to break minds, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that has become possible with regulatory change in Canada and Australia is now we actually see what some of these treatments look like in the real world. So we're moving outside of sort of this clinical trial phase and into real world evidence. About 3 weeks ago, we announced that in partnership with the University of Calgary, which has a psychedelics research chair, believe it or not, we're gathering the first real world evidence on MDMA treatment in the real world, which we intend to submit to regulators like FDA and Health Canada. In terms of the intersection of technology, while we were, when we started off, this is an observational trial. So these people are getting treated, whether you like it or not. We're just gathering the data after the fact. And what we realized is patients were being treated over Zoom. There was 2 or 3 patients now who have been treated over Zoom. As far as I'm aware, this has never been done in a clinical trial, but the real world is messy. So this is gonna happen. A patient wasn't capable of traveling. The therapist decided it was in the best interest of the patient to just do the session online. And so there's going to be sort of these intersections of technology and treatment that happen organically. And I think it's important for all of us to also figure out, how that ends up working. Does it work well? Does it not? And then incorporate that into sort of future development.
I can't really answer on the technology side because that's not my sector, but I can say that in the UK, Professor David Nutt has been looking at, I just say magic mushrooms because my dyslexia means I can't pronounce stuff right, but he's been having a look, and there's now clinical research being done in magic mushrooms. And this is fabulous because for far too long, people haven't had access to that. But as I was sitting here, I was thinking, for people that self-medicate with cannabis, you could have a deficiency in your endocannabinoid system. We don't know why people smoke, but wouldn't it be maybe nice if you had young people who had trauma? I'm thinking of some people that have seen some really violent, horrific stuff, or just lived in poverty, to be fair, that can be traumatic and stuff. How do we pair what they may have been doing recreationally or self-medicinally with some of this technology? How do we connect them with maybe meditation glasses so that they don't just kind of go high, they can go inward? So being able to say to people, keep using this substance, but there's actually other things you could do alongside it that will open you up and enable you to challenge some of these things or unlearn some of these behaviors. And yeah, I think that's very inspiring, is that, it's not about necessarily taking something away. It's about enabling people to have options as to how can I enhance the experience. And as I said, because it's been criminalized, and for Black and racialized communities, it's in many ways, very difficult to have the conversation about health and drug policy because of the stigma. And I really want all of you here to look at your communities when you go back to wherever you're based in the world and just ensure the people being over-policed are included in those, not just included in those conversations, have a seat at the table and are contributing to whatever you're doing.
So we have a couple of minutes left. Are there any questions? Can we get a mic? Over there.
Pekka from Investor Life Science Fund in Helsinki, Finland. Thanks, it's been very inspirational. My kudos to Katrina especially for bringing some color into the discussion and frankly, you know, opening my eyes to some things that just aren't visible in the bubble I live in. But to all of you, I think there are roughly 150,000 deaths in the US for alcohol use, more than 100,000 a year for drug abuse. So there are risks and dangers. We can't close our eyes to that. So simple question to all the panelists. If these, you know, MDMA, cannabis, psilocybin and the likes, if they were approved as medication, should they also be legalized?
I'm going to jump right in on this one. Having worked in a number of industries, including, you know, the nicotine industry, the things that kill people, like the substances that kill people, overwhelmingly are nicotine, number one, cause of, preventable cause of death, smoking, alcohol use disorder, opioid addiction, right? These are all legal things. I think we view risk completely the wrong way as a society. If you have a drug that probably millions of people are taking every single day from black market sources being made God knows where, in God knows what kind of dose, and people are not dying, that's a safe drug, right? I don't care what list it's on, whether it's Schedule 1, 2, or 8, or 15. That's a safe drug by very definition. But that's not how we view it. We view it as unsafe because it is a scheduled, controlled substance. I actually agree with my co-panelists. We should be slow and careful when we make changes, because I think society takes time to sort of get with the program. But in terms of the risks involved for something like psilocybin or MDMA, I would argue the risks are very, very low.
And just before we start, cannabis doesn't have to be inhaled or ingested. You can use it topically. So if you have somebody who plays rugby, American football, they've got aching shoulder, why would you not massage that into them? So I think we just need to be more nuanced about even how we ingest things or how we take them, so that we don't just think it's going to kill you when all you've done is rub it on your back and it's helped your muscles.
Okay, guys, I think that's all we got time for. So thanks to the panelists, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Lawrence, for moderating the conversation. Very important one.